senators on that.
Okay, we're live now. Hello, I'm John from Broadsheet, and you're very welcome to the 21st programme in a series of shows looking at the Mother and Baby Homes report and outstanding kind of issues around that. Joined by June activist Breeda Murphy, adoptee activist and advocate Eunan Duffy, and lawyer and whose friend Brehany, whose father was a Tune adoptee. Good evening, all.
Evening, John.
And, I'm sure we've all been following it the last couple of days. People who have featured largely in a lot of our shows, Catherine Zappone and Roderick O'Gorman. But firstly, Catherine Zappone and the party. Breeda, you're keen to share your thoughts on.
Yeah, I've been exercised, I suppose, right from the start when I heard that she was offered a position. So basically what appears to have happened, or what I understood happened, was that, and I've written to Simon Coveney and to Leo Varadkar and quite a number of others for clarity. They came into the cabinet meeting last Tuesday, and just prior to the cabinet meeting, they had a meeting with Fine Gael representatives who were sitting at cabinet. And apparently they did say to them that they had a role, Catherine Zappone was appointed to the role of freedom of opinion and expression, working with the UN on behalf of Ireland. And then when they were at the meeting, now according to, there are three different opinions as to how many items were on the agenda. So there was either 41, 46 or over 60, depending on who you believe. But either way, it was jam-packed. So it seemed, you know, with 18 people around the table, and I don't know were they all there or did some join in by Zoom, and I don't know if the Attorney General was there, because sometimes the Attorney General attends a cabinet meeting as well. So it appeared that according to Simon Coveney, he alerted them to the fact that in his position as Minister for Foreign Affairs, he had appointed Catherine Zappone to this role. Now, there were other appointments. There were, and they were specified on the agenda. But on the agenda item, it just said UN envoy, or words to that effect, for freedom of opinion and expression. It didn't actually have her name tagged with it. So there was some surprise. I haven't heard. This is what I'm reading from the papers, just in case somebody thinks that I have an ear at cabinet. I'm afraid I haven't, but sadly. But then there was some surprise expressed by Micheál Martin, who it appears okayed the position. And when asked about it, Simon Coveney, and this is what kind of floored me, even though people who know me say, for God's sake, Breeda, you shouldn't be floored. The fact that nobody asked any question or said, you know, how did this come about? Or why did you pick Catherine Zappone? Or what's the criteria? Or objected. So amongst everybody, it appeared there was full agreement that she would take her role. And then the following day, it appeared she had taken the role. So my surprise, I was writing off emails to beat the band because I wanted clarity as to what the role was about, what it entailed, the full package of extras, which are, you know, the expenses, the flights, the subsistence allowance. So it appeared to work out at around €300 per day. If you take it that she were working for 50 to 60 days per year. And it appeared to be a once-off appointment. You know, I don't know, would it have been extended? But it seemed fishy to me, and it seemed fishy to everybody else. So since then, I think there's major problems because, of course, Leo Varadkar, we learned, had attended, I don't know what kind of function, because we don't know the purpose of that function, in the Merrion Hotel, where there were some 50 people gathered. And then it appears ludicrous that the Attorney General would come out and say 200 people can gather when, you know, the Hotels Federation, the churches for the Holy Communions and children's celebrations, and I feel particularly sorry for those who have lost loved ones within that period of time and had a very, you know, had to go through the list of who could attend the funeral. or weddings, or a mother who gave birth alone in the hospital, perhaps to a child who had special needs, or a child who was stillborn, and the father sitting in the car park. To think all of these things could happen, and yet the government can't stand over, and one appears to be backing up the other. But it was really telling last evening that on drive time, neither Catherine Sapone, who never misses an opportunity to speak, like she had been interviewed recently by Miriam on the book that she's written about Anne Louise, her former partner, who died. And she wasn't available. Neither Simon Coveney nor Leo Bradker are available. And the other point I want to make is that in 2011, when Catherine Sapone was appointed by Enda Kenny to the Seanad, so too at that same time was Martin McAleese. So both of these people have failed perhaps the most vulnerable people within Irish society. And we're reaping the repercussions, I suppose, in a way still, and finding that the government are doing whatever they like and saying, look, we can have 50 people in, seated around 6 tables or whatever it is at the Merrion. I would like clarity on that as well from the Merrion to say how many people exactly and what they ate or were given to drink, because it would be unusual to just turn up and not have any refreshments. And that's where the crux is again, So you can tell I'm exercised because we're not getting anywhere, and we're not getting an opportunity to speak on the media like this, John. Like I've really tried, because I think that the media need to listen from the people who are most affected, who include those who have buried loved ones during the period, or who've hoped and wanted to have some sort of family celebration. Say if a dad or mum was seriously ill and they brought forward their wedding, something like that. It's just shocking.
Frank and Eunan, Frank, I just want to briefly change subject just for a second. Frank's first book has been published. It's called Gaspers, and it concerns the air quality on our planes, and a very timely book. And just want to congratulate you on that, Frank. I know.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well done.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Blood, sweat, and tears.
Indeed. It was somewhat ironic that I gather some members of the Department of Children, Roderick O'Gorman's department, were at the party. Were you among those who were expected to meet him, Roderick O'Gorman, Breeda? Were you on the day of the party? Was it the day after?
He was to come to Tuam to meet with our members, but that was postponed at last minute.
Because somebody had COVID in his office, is that right? According to
somebody within the department had tested positive, but not them. They were taking precautions. And to be honest, I was glad they took precautions, because our members are elderly, John, and the last thing we want is that somebody comes down with COVID who's not able to fight it, regardless of being double vaccinated. And that's the point I made just now, speaking on Midlands 103, is that our members are elderly, and we haven't been able to hold a meeting since last July. So it's over a year since we held a face-to-face meeting, which for some is a very important peer supportive environment. We've obeyed the rules.
Yeah. And could that meeting have been cancelled, and those members or some of the workers in that department have gone to that meeting or gone to that party?
I think there was only a skeleton, a couple coming with Roderick O'Gorman in any event, and it would probably have been his first trip to the Tuam site. And if you remember correctly, Catherine Sapone came very early in the morning on her own on occasion. So she had come about 3 or 4 times. And I think for anybody I speak to, I say it's so important you come, you see the site for yourself, because it is so located and hidden off and between within the housing estate that there's something odd about it.
Yeah, Eunan and Frank, if you want to come in terms of, were you exercised, Eunan, yourself about this, or was it just a kind of a distraction from your main work?
It doesn't take much to exercise me, John, to be honest with you, because I mean, we've faced day in, day out scandals, public outrage, politicians doing things they shouldn't be doing, especially when they're supposed to be leading people, not just making decisions, but leading by example, etc., etc. So,
were you
I've
not
seen some.
surprised then that she was given this role, this made-up role, envoy of freedom of expression? You weren't surprised then?
No, not at all, because I mean, we really don't know a quarter of what's going on. You know what I mean? When there's so much patronage, cronyism, so much quid pro quo going on between people of power and influence. I mean, we really don't know the quarter of it. And I mean, there are SPADs continually brought in to work under MLAs in the north, for example, and we have no idea what the selection recruitment process would be there either. And you find out as you go along when there's some kind of a scandal or somebody does something that they shouldn't, that you find out that there's a lot of patronage and nepotism going on there as well. You know what I mean? So many family members or SPADs, whether they're actually qualified to do the job or not. So unfortunately, this is just the reality of the world we're living in. And I would hazard a guess that in terms of the menu for the Marion Hotel, I would say there's a very good chance that swill was the main course, because people will talk about pigs and troughs, etc., etc., and we'll probably never find out who exactly attended this function. A bit like Gulfgate last year, which is still another investigation that hasn't been handled. And there's even the investigation of the leak that came out to the government, before the Commission's report came out. We're still waiting to hear what came of that as well. But a lot of these things, it's just a case of, do you know what? We'll just go ahead and do it. If we get found out, we'll try and cover our backsides as best we can. Hope that it dies down. It'll only be a 24-hour turbulence, and it'll hopefully go away. I mean, these people just basically feel and act, and because there's no accountability really on so many levels, just know that they can act in whatever way they want, and hopefully, there'll be no public outrage and reaction. They know that there's elections sort of far off in the distance. A lot of people would have forgot about this, but I mean, the governments, whether it's North, South, UK, whatever, they're on a daily basis committing absolutely atrocious acts on the electorate, and there's very little. I mean, you sometimes wonder, are you better living under a dictatorship like Saddam Hussein or somebody like that? You might have more rights and accountability,
This is it. I mean, Frank, like, to us, it's just completely absurd that Catherine Zebon will be offered this after her tenure as Minister for Children. I mean, it's like this is a thank you to her.
Yeah, I mean, it's. Am I surprised? No, I'm not. When you live in the UK, particularly since 2016, you begin to realise that there is definitely one law for them and one law for us. And recent weeks, we've seen, I was struck by something Breeda said there about this one law for them and us. And there was this bit of a scandal with Johnson and Sunak, who had been in the sphere of somebody who'd got COVID. But it was okay, they didn't have to quarantine. They were part of a new test program where they could be tested every day, and everybody's saying, what the heck is that? And then this week, the big scandal, the latest scandal is that if you pay £250,000, you can have direct consultative access to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And, there's me and my other work with campaigning, and I work with other campaigners in the UK. And I often say that to get into Westminster, it's easier to pass through the eye of a needle than to get through St. Stephen's Gate. I have far easier access to people at the European Commission at cabinet level there than I've ever had down at Westminster.
Right.
And, since 2005, I've met one minister, and, to even try and get an MP to meet with you is a task in itself. But hey, you know, we in the UK are living with a government since 2016 who operates by skunkworks. So they'll try something out, blast it out. It's a disruptor kind of mechanism, see how shocked the public are. And if it's too much in the public opinion polls, then they stop it. They move on to the next skunkworks. And I think governments throughout the world generally are infected by this. They've got a disease, you know, where they feel that, you know, democracy and people complaining about, you know, the failure of their rights is not really something that they're going to be bothered about. It's about promoting self-interest and a wider interest of commercial interests and indeed religious interests. And I don't know where it will end. I really don't know. But I will say one thing. The country that I grew up in, I don't recognize at all. I really don't recognize it.
No.
So when I hear of other countries and scandals that they've got bubbling away there, I ain't surprised, because I think, as Eunan quite correctly says, we're all suffering with the same problem, the same issues. People, how the heck some of these people get elected? What on earth is going on in the electorate's minds? And people promote it to levels way above their abilities. It's just shocking.
Well, I think Catherine Zappone actually lost her seat, didn't she, in the last election? And I suppose this is how they repay her if she can't get elected in a way. And what I would say though is, when Catherine Zappone got the job, I was very optimistic. I just assumed because, you know, she was against the patriarchy and, you know, the Catholic Church and how it was run and the treatment of women. And so I don't know how other women felt, but I mean, it seemed like such a betrayal. And yet she's toasted at the Marion Hotel and off to New York, you know, for her sinecure or whatever. That's very depressing, I think. You know, I mean, she ran out the clock as Minister for Children concerning the report. The report itself, Roger O'Gorman had to kind of deal with the fallout from it, but it's on her. It was during her shift, you know, her time, and I don't think she's even spoken out about it. In fact,
no, and when the Taoiseach was investigating the leak at the cabinet table, I wrote to him to say, while you're investigating that one, we're waiting 6.5 months to know of who leaked to the Jodie Corcoran, you know, the report. And you see, as Frank says earlier, it's the drip feeding. They sort of they throw out something and they wonder how you'll react. And I think that's part and parcel of the spin doctors that are often in these places. You know, they have this notion that they can get the little people around to their way of thinking. And I'm always reminded of Tony Gregory. I mean, I admire that man so much. I think he was an incredible politician. And I doubt very much that he ever had, you know, an advisor, a special advisor. Some of these advisors, John, are paid 180,000.
Yeah.
You know, and there were 2 advisors appointed on the 1st of May, but yet that came up at the last cabinet meeting. It was Fia Kelly and somebody else. So they're appointed to the Taoiseach. So, like, between them, can they not realise that, look, we have to be honest with the electorate. The electorate are not stupid. They tend to think all the time that we're going into a bank holiday weekend, we're going into summer recess. So there's no opportunity for the electorate themselves to come back at us. And they're right on that, because the media don't even want to hear from us. So you're kind of clutching at how you can get your message across that you're so frustrated.
I don't wish to personalize it, but just on Catherine Zappone, when Pope Francis came to Ireland and she presented him with a letter written in Italian, asking would he put up some money for the exhumation of the bodies. What was that like to the survivors? I mean, what was how did they react to that?
Well, you see, survivors, many of them in our group, feel that the church are responsible and must pay some money. So
Okay.
they want the accountability from the church's perspective. And I think in that she would have been seen, some people would have seen her as brave. Some people within government would have said, what is she doing? You know, she's going outside of the channels that we can operate this. But there is no way that you know, to date, we've never held the church to account.
But Breeda, didn't Catherine Zappone use the expense of this thing as a kind of a delaying tactic? Not a delaying tactic, she would say, but simply because it was going to cost too much money, as if money was even a consideration. It was so bizarre, wasn't it? I mean,
it is bizarre because that's been the government narrative all along. And while you say, you know, when Catherine Zappone came in, of course, we thought she's independent, she's female, she's outside of Ireland, she's not drawn into Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, so she will be a champion for survivors of mother and baby homes or other, you know, issues. But that didn't materialise. And I often think when they go over the plinth in Leinster House, something happens. Not to all of them, but certainly to some. And
yeah, I think it may have happened with her in Boston College. But, you know, I mean, her background is more interesting now than I think she was always going to side with
wrong to take it was wrong to take it outside of Ireland, to have that discussion that she had in Boston College, because again, that wasn't accessible to us. It wasn't accessible to the people that they were speaking about. So, and it is within, you know, Ireland has to deal with its own problems. There are many examples around the world, but we could actually lead the way on the involvement of people who are affected by these issues, whether they're the families. And oftentimes when I speak, and I know, you know, our group is mainly survivors, but there are families of the lost children. And oftentimes I'm mindful of that. And I repeat that many times because recently, only this week, Derek Leinster, who turned 80, he has fought for the Protestants, the homes to be recognised in the same way as the Catholic homes. And he feels defeated at times that they will never get the redress that they deserve. So I think we need to shout together and stand.
We must get him on, Breeda, if he would like to.
Yeah, he lives in the UK, and yeah, I would hope he would come on. He certainly is one of the best campaigners that there is on the Protestant issue for so many years.
Eunan, just to sort of extend what we were talking about with Catherine Zappone, when you're dealing with people who are obviously, you know, operating in bad faith to a degree, well, certainly Catherine Zappone was in terms of the cost and stuff like that. How do you personally deal with it, Eunan? And what do you do? Do you just
what can you do, really? I mean, history has a long-standing relationship with rewarding people completely unjustifiably at the end of the day. I mean, it's
there's some sense up the north, aren't there, with dealing with these issues, aren't there? I mean,
listen, John, as I say, I mean, Sir Edward Brehany was the commissioner-in-chief in Ireland at the time around the so-called famine, which other people like us would call the genocide, and he's been written out of history by Irish historians as well as anybody else. And I mean, he got all sorts of honours from the Queen, etc., for, you know, the genocidal work that he carried out in Ireland between 1845 and 50. It's absolutely staggering that people are constantly rewarded. I mean, you've got Ian Paisley Jr. in the north here. I mean, that man's carrying out absolutely despicable acts virtually on a weekly basis. And he's, I mean, you know, going away, having all sorts of cozy relationships with dictatorships in foreign countries, coming back, you know, taking all these holidays, you know what I mean, again, under questionable expenses. Just off the scale, John. I mean, what can we do at the end of the day? It seems, as Breeda says, it seems that some politicians, whatever their roots, whenever they cross the line and get appointed into government, whether at whatever position, I mean, they just turn into somebody else. And it's a bit like, you know, we're all equal, but some are more equal than others.
To say that they're like a hostage of the civil service, that's effectively their line would be, I guess, in their defence, that they're being led by the permanent government.
Yeah, well, how much autonomy and independence does a minister actually have when they get into government? You know what I mean? Because they have to toe the line, and if you don't, then they'll find a way of getting rid of you. Boris Johnson is an unelected prime minister. I mean, the world is full of positions where people are put into place through all sorts of nefarious means, and I mean, once people get into government, when you're so I suppose confined and restricted to the selection of parties and individuals, etc., etc. I mean, you're really left with very little choices. I would say that, you know, if we were in the 60s and 70s here and 80s, a lot more people would probably be out in the streets demonstrating about a lot more bigger issues. You know what I mean? Taking people to task. Revolutions and rebellion seems to be a thing of the past, especially in so-called developed countries and Western civilized countries, etc., etc. It just seems to be a thing. Even the whole COVID thing is exactly the same. When we're talking about social and world responsibility to each other, it all boils down to people just doing their own thing, taking absolutely selfish actions, regardless of how many consequences and how many people are affected by their actions.
Yeah, the COVID thing has sort of kicked a lot of things to touch for the moment, anyway. Breeda, what's next for the survivors in terms of meeting, and is there any planned rallies?
Yeah, I would hope. Yeah, we're trying to plan ourselves to get together. It's very difficult, but there is something coming up in UIG that they've just written to us today about. So that'll be in October. So we'll get the survivors' opinion on that, and that would be with another university, Liverpool University, being interested in their stories. I think that, you know, the narrative from the survivor perspective has to gather legs, and it has to go overseas, because so many of our survivors live overseas. And I think that, you know, the time has come to really hold ministers, regardless of who they are or what good work they've done. And I've said that to Simon Coveney, whatever he has done with regard to Brexit or the Northern Ireland Protocol, you know, that's overshadowed by this. His legacy will be disappointment, regardless of how he tries to put it to bed, because he was adamant. And when he spoke on Drive Time, I think it was, he sounded arrogant, you know, and that doesn't come across well to people like us who are, you know, working with survivors, trying to access their rights and knowing how difficult it is. So I think likewise with Leo Varadkar, he won't be able to put this down until they come out in public and either come before an Oireachtas committee or come on the radio or answer questions.
Do you think Catherine Zappone would have kept the job if the party thing hadn't emerged?
I think you see, by her silence, really, she was in collusion. She was quite happy to have that position. And, you know, it's called freedom of opinion and expression. So why didn't she come out strongly and defend her position and, you know, and say why she really wanted to represent the Irish people? But she didn't. So she thought it would blow over as well. And it's only when members, both within Fianna Fáil and that came out, and I think some of the backbenchers within Fianna Fáil, and I said this in my email to them, you know, did Simon Coveney pick this opportune time when the Dáil was in recess, as we went into a bank holiday weekend, and by the Tuesday when the media would again look at it, it would have blown over, and you'd have lone voices like myself or Eunan or Frank or, you know, people up and down the country who were exercised. But, you know, you write to the government and you might get an acknowledgement to say thank you, but, you know, I didn't get an acknowledgement from Leo Varadkar. I rang their offices, John. I was on for, I'd say, 20 minutes to them. You know, I knew I wouldn't get to speak with them, but I wanted to reflect how angry we were that they think they can get away with this. You know, I don't care if they've appointed, you know, Mickey Mouse. It doesn't matter who they've appointed, but you go into a cabinet meeting and you think you can railroad people, but then it shows how weak our cabinet is. So we're stuck again, you know.
Also ironic that the UN rapporteur was so critical of Catherine Zeta when she was minister. Frequently, I think, for letting down survivors, and so
Yeah.
kind of ironic there. Frank, your feelings?
It's interesting listening to Breeda's and Eunan's responses. I think there was somebody who once said, "There's no such thing as society," and if you really want to trace back how things have changed politically, perhaps it's from that point, excuse me, onwards. And you asked the question, what do you do when you're stonewalled as a campaigner?
Yeah.
And believe you me, I've had plenty of stonewalling. I've also had members of parliament blackball me as well.
Right.
And those are really difficult things to do, because often campaigners are working singularly, and it's very difficult when you kind of lose that particular route in. For me personally, I've never ever been bothered about patronage. I mean, I know people have received their invitations to garden parties at Buckingham Palace and goodness knows what, because they've towed the line. They've been relatively uncontroversial. And I think this is, if you bring it down to the core issues and the core problems, I see it from other aspects. I can see that large multi-billion euro industries are very well coordinated, even with their competitors. And they drive a very strong message with politicians, be they at Westminster, even in the European Commission. But the difference that I've seen, for example, in the European Commission, is that they do actively solicit stakeholders, singular stakeholder voices and stuff like that. And I know that's correct because I've been certainly one of them. But I think one of the big issues here is whatever and however politicians behave and treat issues, one of the key factors that really allows them to get away with what they get away with, and I'm saying this now in a much broader brush than just simply the Magdalene story, is that campaigners are often not unified. Sometimes they're even against each other.
Yeah.
And I see that in so many different areas. And that, I can see it. I see that's what allows politicians to escape scrutiny and, hard questions.
But a lot of that is controlled opposition too, fifth columnists, agent provocateurs.
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, John, a lot of it, I see as a lot at Westminster, is patronage. It's this belief that if they stick close enough to an MP or a couple of MPs, they will, in some respects, get some kind of progress. Often as not, they don't. But they do get introduced into a kind of an expenses environment, where they get their hotel and travel paid for. They get put up as a guest speaker at various functions. And so there is a kind of a kudos. And they stand next to the MP, whilst the television cameras are rolling. And that is all very well. And I've seen some of these campaigners come and go because after a while, the MP gets bored, or a group of MPs get bored, and they move on to the next cause celeb. And the individuals in question, they're kind of left out on their own. But equally, there is a kind of a strange set of behaviours amongst campaigners. And again, I'm stressing, I'm talking about other areas, not this area. But there may well be similar models in the Magdalene kind of issue. But, they get terribly uptight with each other and end up fighting with each other. And that's what allows, in my view, the politicos, the spads, as Eunan points out. I've met quite a few spads in my time, and some of them are special advisors.
Oh yeah, the spads.
Yeah. And some of these young people are very, very clever. But, they're under the cosh of the MPs a lot of the time. And I've seen it. I've seen how some spats have been broken by MPs. And, the issue about whether or not the MPs are under the cosh of, say, the civil service, I'm not so sure that that's correct anymore in the UK. I think that's very much used to be the case. But I think these days, it's now more about dogma and PR and close proximity to mainstream media and stuff like that. And this kind of skunk works that I talk about.
But you would think that somebody like Catherine Zappone would include the mother and baby homes as part of her mission to kind of change Ireland, I think that they would be included, as being the great example of how women were badly treated in Ireland and children. But she did not take that on. And
it's interesting because for the first time I've heard more about Catherine Zappone than I've ever heard in this broadcast. And I think Breeda hit the nail right on the head there when she said that really, if she was really keen to have this particular role, she should have publicly set out her own ambition for the role. And, if that included mother and baby homes, if that included, sort of bringing out a better dialogue to shine a light on the activities of the Catholic Church in Ireland, she should have said so, because she would have won public support, easily won public support. But, if they're all having conversations with themselves and their navels, well, they clearly weren't thinking, about the wider possibilities of the role.
Yeah, well, maybe her attitude towards the Pope, with whom she curtsied before, might have had some bearing on it. Frank, I know you've got to go very soon, so
sure. Yeah.
Good luck. The best of luck with the book. Can I ask you? You're also writing a book about your father.
Yeah, I am. I'm now galloping up towards the end because I was writing two books in obviously in tandem, and very pleased to get the one out of the way. Essentially, I'm writing the story, my dad's and my grandmother's story, but it's interesting how it's morphing into other people's stories, and indeed a little bit autobiographical. I can't even say it. Autobiographical in my sense, and indeed how my own thoughts and opinions have changed. Whether it's about religion or indeed the developing political scene that I'm encountering, but yeah, it's now galloping up to the end, and it should be finished by the end of October, and possibly even we might be close by the end of October to having edited it as well. And that's no mean feat, to say the least. But it's proving to be a great cathartic experience in so many ways, and in particular for my family, because I talked to my family about the writing of the book, and it's quite.
Just to remind you, your mother or your grandmother was in Tune, but then taken to Hyde Park.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. She was taken to the Hyde Park laundry. I'm actually writing at this moment in time about life in the Hyde Park laundry, and what she was experiencing at that time, because of the research that I've done, I'm actually able to talk about that. And yes, it's about her story, about her journey there. And it's not just about her life, but it is also going to be about her death and what happens towards the end of her life, and indeed her death, and subsequent issues there. And the other thing which I'm happily able to write about is, because I've been badgering for ages to get records about my dad in Chewham. So I'm now able to virtually plot the story from the moment she became pregnant and it kind of broke out in the family, right the way through to Loughrea County Home and Galway Central Hospital and Chewham and then High Park. But in my father's case, I kind of understood that he grew up in Glenamaddy, but I never understood the pre-story. And I've got a great set of anecdotes about him when he was in Glenamaddy growing up, and what a character he was.
Right.
But it's his early life that was the real catch. And you find out from the records that I've so far got, the kind of life that he led. And you know, I'm as critical as anyone about the Mother and Baby Home Report, but within the Mother and Baby Home Report, there is a good history of what life was like for children in that. And I'm so grateful to Breeda's group, the Alliance group, because some of the people that I've met there on our meetings, our Zoom meetings, they've expressed some of the most harrowing stories, absolutely harrowing stories that are not recorded in any of these reports. Shocking things that children had to do to support themselves. And so I've got all of this in my mind, and then I see my dad's story. And, you know, he had measles, he had eczema, and when he was 4.5, he became anemic, you know, suffering with anemia. He was quite a poorly little boy.
Right.
And the one thing that you realize when you get under the skin of this is that he was a very brave little boy. They were all brave little boys and all brave little girls.
Mm.
The kind of things that Irish society allowed their children, you know, Irish society is about, you know, bringing up children and looking after children and giving them as good a life as possible. You know, so that they can go off into the world. And these poor but brave and wonderful children, you know, started their lives in this fashion. And, you know, my dad, at just short of 5 years old, was boarded out to what it turns out to actually a wonderful family. But when I was reviewing the research the last couple of weeks, some of the stories I heard about the other boarded out kids, quite awful, quite shocking. Yeah. And it was something somebody said, something really interesting. Somebody said to me that I met up there in Glenamaddy, and he said it was shocking what happened to those lads when they went across to England. And it reminded me of the times when I was in the police, when I was a police officer in the streets of Birmingham. And these guys are dead now, so I can obviously name them. But there was, we used to call them our regular drunks. But there was a guy like Thomas Joseph Burns and Tommy Cahill. Tommy Cahill was no more than about 4.5 feet tall. He was the smallest man that I ever come across. But I couldn't help but think, you know, the kind of, how did they get, you know, what kind of life did they have before? Yeah. How did they get to England? And, you know, what kind of skills did they not have, you know, to be able to get through life? The terrible, terrible situation that many young Irish boys got themselves into over here is mind-boggling. And I wouldn't mind betting that there were some of those guys, the Tommy Cahills of this world, who came from mother and baby homes and were boarded out and treated badly.
And if not, industrial schools or
industrial schools, whatever. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's this kind of richness that I'm hoping that I can, you know, sort of bring to this story. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, I would have met those men in the 80s in London. I worked in building sites summer and a bit longer actually. And I mean, some of them can write, you know, they're illiterate, but and it's just so heartbreakingly sad. And they were they were very sad in their cups, you know, with drink, and just the abject loneliness of it all.
Terrible.
I really look forward to the book. Eunan, any developments your end with Nuri, with the home in Maryvale? Any developments there?
I'm waiting on some communications back from various parties about various issues that some of which you can't really talk about, John. But
fair enough.
Still engaged in the adoption practice group, which is a sort of semi-quasi government initiative dealing with our access to records, etc., etc. And Frank gave me a good piece of information yesterday about a Facebook Ireland case with the European Union Commission. When I conveyed it to all present, basically there was a deathly silence straight after. Do you know what I mean? Because it was it was particularly looking about the phenomena of harm. One of the things that is used to withhold information from people, and let's just say it threw a bit of a grenade into the discussion, and it sort of cleared the decks. A few people that came from the information governance team are dealing with the adoption issues. So it's all priceless, but we're moving very slowly. Frank's book will be a brilliant reference book to stonewalling. I mean, that man's obviously suffered the same sort of stonewalling that we're all facing on a regular basis. So it'll be a good insight into how, when you can't get in the door, you have to try and find a window or climb down through the chimney.
Yes.
Well, in a week of ironies, I know, Frank, you're going to have to leave. Breeda, any final words on?
To say that Mick Cole has put up on Twitter. There were 20 advisors to there are 8 to Eamon Ryan, 6 to the Taoiseach, and 6 to the Taoiseach, at a cost of almost 2 million. And altogether, it's crazy. Altogether in government, there are supposedly 70 advisors to the government at a cost I've seen written, if the government goes full term, if the Dáil sits for the full 5 years, of 34 million. I mean, that needs close scrutiny. We need to really look at that and look at you know, what are they doing? You know, they're making things a million times worse because they're doing a spin like they are for Catherine Savone. Why couldn't Simon Coveney come out with his hands up and say, I made a mistake? He didn't do that for some days.
Well, they've like 3 royal courts, and they've Radker and Coney and Neil Martin's, you know, it's absurd. Do you know what? I've been inspired by this story. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a formal application to become a special representative for the Irish diaspora. Yeah.
Brilliant.
And they will get value for money, I promise you. You heard it here first on Broadsheet.
Thanks a lot, Frank. Eunan, anything before we go? You wanted to get in there?
No, just as usual. Thanks very much, John, for giving us a platform to speak about the issues where a lot of other people abdicate responsibility. So we appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It's a total pleasure. Breeda Murphy, Eunan Duffy, Frank Brehany, thank you.